Hello everyone, Power here, and welcome back to another video. In this one we're going to be taking a look at some Lugia decks from Silver Tempest as we go over some Japanese lists. So just looking at some key translations, Lugia VSTAR is a 280 HP colorless type V-Star, so you do have a weakness and you're not hitting anything else for weakness, but you do have access to powerful colorless energy which allow you to do additional damage. And that's sort of like the main appeal, I guess, of colorless typing, outside of the fact, though, it is pretty bad because you'll not be hitting any other deck in the format for weakness. However, 280 HP and resistance to fighting does mean you have decent tanking potential, especially with the new V-God energy. So Lugia V-Star has a very powerful attack in the form of Tempest Dive. For 4 colorless energy, does 220 damage, and then you may discard a stadium in play. Very efficient damage and will allow you to control the board state in terms of stadiums. Then the V-Star Power Summoning Star says during your turn, you may put up to 2 colorless Pokemon that don't have a rule box from your discard pile onto your bench. In this way, you can find stuff like Archeops, which will allow you to accelerate up to 2 different types of special energy to one of your Pokemon during your turn. So in that way, we can pay for the expensive attack Tempest Dive using Archeops. Then Serena is a very important supporter card that's coming out in Silver Tempest as well. Has 2 effects. You choose one of them. Either you discard 3 cards from your hand. If you discard any cards in this way, draw cards until you have 5 in your hand. Or you switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon V with their active Pokemon. So Serena will essentially double as a way to not only draw more cards and discard colorless Pokemon to discard with Summoning Star, but also to essentially act as a boss's order if you need it. So then some other card translations, the Archeops that we mainly want to target with our V-Star power, has the amazing ability Primal Turbo. It says once in your turn you may search your deck for up to 2 different special energy cards, or 2 of the same ones should say, and attach them to one of your Pokemon. So it doesn't even have to be the active or the bench, it can just be either one you wish. And then V-Guard Energy is a new energy out in the set. It says this Pokemon this card is attached to provides 1 colorless energy. It takes 30 less damage from your opponent's Pokemon V, however, so very powerful special energy that will give you more tanking ability. So going into this first list here, it's not really a conventional build, I would say, for Lugia. Playing a 2-1 line of the Crobat Vmax. Not sure I'm a fan of this. It does give you a nice option to hit Mew for weakness damage, but at the same time, I'm not so much of a fan of, switching in and out with Crobat and doing chip poison damage. However, there's a lot of things to like about this list, including the amazing rare Pokemon. So Raikou doing the 120 and then the 120 snipe, and then Yveltal for 5 energy allows you to take a massive 1-hit KO. Yveltal is typically very hard to power up, even in the Lost Zone decks, but with Archeops it's basically a breeze. So very interested to see how Yveltal plays into Lugia in winning matchups that it would otherwise struggle with. Just looking at some trainers here, there is some interesting ones, such as the Echoing Horn and 2 Lost Sweeper. Lost Sweeper will give you more control over stadiums and tool cards, while Echoing Horn allows you to bring back a Pokemon from your opponent's discard pile and put it onto their bench. So in this way, you could use Echoing Horn to bring back something like a Sobble, for example, and then use Raikou again to target it down, or maybe it's to bring back a VMAX, or, well, not a VMAX, but like a V Pokemon to 1-hit KO with a Yveltal or something. So pretty interesting in that regard. Supporters are also pretty decent. We have the 4 Serena, 3 Marnie, 2 Research, and then 1 Charon's Care as a way of healing off all Lugia. So then, just looking at the second list, it is fairly similar to some of the other ones we'll see today, but this one's taking more of a defensive approach, playing the Dunsparce just to give you protection from lightning-type attackers. They may want to take advantage of all Lugia. So stuff like Flying Pikachu, for example, would get a 1-hit KO, but with Dunsparce, they're getting the 2-hit KO instead. So very powerful in that regards. Not too many differences from the other lists. Is playing Pumpkaboo just allow you to have additional stadium control, so if they play a Temple of Sinnoh or Path to the Peak, you are playing 2 Collapse Stadium, which will allow you to shrink both players' your opponent's bench size down a bit, so you can control it in that sense. You also have 1 copy of Professor Brunette, so you can use that to search your deck for like 2 Archeops or something and discard them. And then you can then use Lugia's V-Star power to put them onto the bench. So yeah, pretty varied list. Supporter count is also like a wee bit thinner compared to some of the other ones because you're making room for more special energy as well as more Pokemon. This next one is probably my favorite variant of the lot, and it's the Gengar one. So essentially Gengar is 320 HP Vmax that has two very powerful attackers, but typically in the past you've had to use Houndoom to accelerate the special energy in the form of single strike energy, which will of course buff your damage by 20. Now this is pretty bad in a V-Star age because of all the V-Star Pokemon giving up 2 prize cards, they can essentially prize trade very favorably with a lower HP Gengar. However, with Archeops you can accelerate the single strike energy without putting damage counters on him like Houndoom would, so seems like a very strong way of powering up Gengar. And with a Choice Belt and those single strike energy, you can easily get 1-hit KOs on V-Star Pokemon and VMAX Pokemon in the game. So all that bearing in mind, is this better than other Lugia variants? Probably not, to be honest, but it's still really good, and it's definitely one I'm keeping an eye on. Especially if all the amazing rare Pokemon and other partners end up, costing a lot more. Plus, this build is not reliant on, not so much reliant, I guess, on abilities, so you can play stuff like 4 Path to the Peak, and you can afford to be more consistent with your supporters because you're playing a lot less of, other techie Pokemon. So, yeah, I'm a big believer in this list. I think it could be pretty good, so let me know if you think Gengar has any potential with Lugia. So this next one, we're going back to the sort of amazing rare Pokemon. This one's kind of set itself apart though by playing the Zeraora. This is something I saw on a couple of Lugia lists. It will allow you to get that, of course, 1-hit KO on Palkia and allow you to cover an additional weakness. Of course, Palkia is very fast, but if you can just Archeops onto Zeraora in a single turn with Choice Belt, you can get a 1-hit KO. So I thought that was worth mentioning. There's also a couple of other techs in this deck, such as the Radiant Zard and Dunsparce and Pumpkaboo. That's a massive thing to note actually is the Radiant Zard. I forgot to mention this earlier, but Greninja isn't so good in this deck because you don't really want to discard any of your special energy, so Radiant Zard ends up being the better choice. You can also power it up fairly efficiently with Archeops, making it a very good option. So this next variant, we're sort of going back to the kind of like 4 Marnie, 3 Path to the Peak that we saw in the Gengar build. The Gengar build I think was playing the 4 Path to the Peak, but still fairly disruptive. And this build essentially wants to stop Mew. Mew specifically, because it plays the Drapion, it plays the 3 Path to the Peak. So essentially, if your opponent has a Stadium War, you can come in there with Paths and stop all their Genesects. And then as soon as they put down their Stadiums and get rid of your Stadiums, you then promote Drapion and just like 1-hit KO Mew, and then essentially the game is pretty much in your favor at that point. Then of course Slacking is very hard to KO, and can dish out massive amounts of damage with powerful Colorless Energy. So super cool list. I'm not sure I'm a major fan of this one, but I could see this being one of the better Lugia variants moving forward. So this next build is definitely on the defensive side, playing the Dunsparce to remove your weakness, but also playing the Radiant Gardevoir to take 20 less damage from attacks. Even though this list is playing 4 Raw Energy and 4 Double Turbo, it opts to go for Gardevoir over Radiant Zard in favor of being a more tanky build. Of course, in conjunction with V-God Energy, Gardevoir will essentially mean you take 50 less damage from Pokemon V's attacks. A very powerful effect, especially in combo with stuff like Echoing Horn, Palpad, 3 Lost Sweeper, 2 Big Charm, Charon's Care, and a copy of Silene, allowing you to recycle resources as well as control the board in a more advanced state. I'm a big fan of this list. I think it could be very disruptive, and if played correctly, could be very strong. So moving on, we have the Duraludon build. This one, of course, focusing on Duraludon's massive attack, Gmax Pulverization, that does 220 damage, and then it goes through effects. Duraludon also has immunity from Special Energy, so in a Lugia-style format, I could definitely see this variant being very potent. Of course, there comes the argument, is this build better than the Arceus Duraludon build? Because Arceus Duraludon essentially has more room, and therefore can play stuff like Hyper Potion and the Crystal Caves. This variant, however, cannot, but what it can do is accelerate single strike energy and do a whole bunch more damage. And essentially, Duraludon becomes this massive, very hard to KO, especially with Radiant Gardevoir in play. So not only does Duraludon have 330 HP naturally, you could take 50 less in conjunction with the Gardevoir and V-God Energy, and then give him a big charm, and he already has 360. So I think this deck could end up being very scary to play against in a tournament, especially if you're doing fairly minimal damage throughout the turns. And if you're a single prize deck, you probably just cry at that point because you're never really doing enough damage unless you're playing something like Regigigas. So Yeah, very scary deck. Hopefully it's not too consistent because the idea of this being in the format is very scary, but could be interesting. Moving on to a list that sadly will not be able to, be part of Silver Tempest due to the fact that Luxray was delayed to the special set coming out a few months after. However, if you decide in testing you really like this build, you could always just build a very similar Lugia variant and then go back to the Luxray build when it finally drops. So Luxray can start in the active spot with its powerful ability, and then for a single colorless energy, does 50 damage, and then you can search your deck for any 2 trainers that you want. So just a nice way of setting up, as well as being able to find out Serena's Evolution Incense, and just discarding Archeops and able to set up faster. The build also plays some more interesting Pokemon, such as the Regigigas that for 5 energy, which is very costly, does 150, and then if your opponent's active as a Vmax, does 150 more. And then because we have different ways of finding out Choice Belt and thinning out, we can theoretically just slap a Choice Belt and several powerful colorless energy on Regigigas and take massive 1 KOs. This build's also playing not SQV, just allow you to have a better time against big basic decks. So this next build is very much a techie out build. It plays a ton of different Pokemon, including the Primate Wisdom Aranguru, the Dunsparce to remove that painful weakness, the Galarian Zapdos V to have a better time against stuff like Arceus and Eternatus, a Drapion for a better Mew matchup, a Zamazenta that can do a ton of damage in the late game, and a Veltor for a free 1 KO, a Radiant Zard for a massive 1 KO in the late game, as well as a Tapu Koko that has free retreat and a very powerful attack that you can make use of with Aurora Energy. So, super interesting list. It's super cool to see. There's like a lot of techie options in here. I'm not sure how consistent this one will be in compared to the other ones. In many ways, I'd much rather play a deck that, has more of a guaranteed success rate. But essentially, I don't think this deck is particularly bad or anything. I just, I'm not a fan of these kind of like techie out decks because often when you're making room for decks, you sacrifice consistency quite a bit. But either way, it's a very cool list, and it'll be interesting to see how this one performs moving forward. So moving on a bit here, we have yet again another defensive build, just proving that Lugia doesn't have to be all about aggro and taking massive 1 KOs, even though its build still plays the Yveltal. It is playing the Radiant Gardevoir. It's also playing 2 Hyper Potion, allowing you to discard 2 energy and heal 120 damage, which is a very easy effect to apply to because Archeops can actually accelerate 2 energy each turn. Then of course we are playing the double, does 120 damage and then 30 more for each prize card your opponent's taken, and himself takes 30 less. Then because his attack cost is 3 colors and he's a colorless Pokemon, we can use V-God Energy as well as powerful colors on double. So it's super cool to see that double seeing some use. Even have the Drapion splash in here as well to have like a better chance against Mew. It's a really cool list, and I love the inclusion of Echoing Horn as well. It's allowed to take easier KOs with the double, so I'm a big fan of this one. I think it could be really cool, and definitely one of the easier variants of Lugia to play. So just going to oh, that was the last one. Never mind. Oh yeah, this last one. I got confused there because all these variants are very similar. But here we are at the last variant. This one again is more of a sort of a Zeraora Regigigas techie build, but this one I think is the most consistent out of all of them. Essentially, you're playing a very thick line of your main attackers, and the only techs you play are the Gigas, the Zeraora, the Radiant Zard, and then the Dunsparce. I like this build the most because it plays 4 Choice Belt, 4 Serena. Your stadium count is limited to 3, so you have a good control of path to the peak. Ultimately, I just think this is probably one of the best ways to play Lugia, if not the best. Be interesting to see how this develops moving forward. But I'm a huge fan of this Lugia build, and I'm just curious to see if people can be successful with it, or if you do have to play the amazing rares such as Yveltal in order for Lugia to be very good. But either way, thank you for watching. A little bit messy at the end there, sorry about that. But either way, it's been a super interesting series just to see all the Lugia variants that are performing in Japan. So yeah, let me know what you think down below, and I'll hopefully see you next time. Thank you for watching.